All right, let's try again. Can anyone hear me this time? All right, sorry about that, guys. We're using a new platform today, just trying to get used to it. My apologies on that, guys. So, as I was saying earlier, Jason with the Provision ISR, Southwest Navigated Camera guys.
Hold the chair.
If you guys have any questions, need anything, we're just going to use the phone as listen in. Go ahead and type whatever you need over onto the right so that we can get those questions answered. Today, I'm going to be covering the ProvisionISR SIA, upgrading the firmware on NVRs and DVRs. So, just to go ahead and hop into it. Well, I don't see any complaints, so I'm going to go ahead and get right into it right now. So there are multiple different ways to upgrade the firmwares for ProvisionISR products. You can do it directly at the device. You can do it through the web. You can do it through using the IPC manager. So we're going to cover all three of those methods on how to upgrade both NVRs and DVRs. So a lot of people do ask, why necessarily do we have to upgrade the firmware? Generally, we're going to be selling products with the newest firmware. You're going to be able to have all the options, but occasionally you have equipment that's been in the field, and some of the advanced options that ProvisionISR has developed won't be available until you upgrade the firmware on the devices. So with that being said, we've also found a bug with one type of recorder in particular. Our 8 megapixel DVRs, any of the 8 megapixel DVRs that are running 1.3.3.2 are having a hard time showing cameras and generally won't show any image whatsoever. And again, that's only 8 megapixel DVRs, 4, 8, and 16 channels. So we're in the process of upgrading all the firmwares for the ones here in admin, so it should be transparent to everyone. You guys will just get your DVRs with 1.3.4. And if you the ones that are out in the field, we will be pulling back and doing firmware upgrades, or we will be instructing the branches on how to do the firmware upgrades on those. So that's one of the reasons we're doing this webinar, so as everyone can get a handle on how to upgrade the firmware should they need to. So we're going to cover, as I said, a couple different methods to upgrade the firmware. The first one I wanted to show you was on the IPC Manager tool. So on the IPC Manager tool, when you run the IPC Manager tool, it's going to go out on your network and it's going to show you everything that's on your network and list it right here. And it will also show you your firmware version if you scroll a little bit over to the right or if you have it open full screen. So as you can see right now, I have the 16 channel DVR 5 megapixel and it's running 1.3.3. So I want to go ahead and I want to upgrade the firmware on this DVR. So to do this, first things first, I need to go find the firmwares. So all the firmware for all the products is going to be on ProvisionISR's website. So if you go into ProvisionISR's website, and then you actually navigate to the product. I'm already on the product page, but I can kind of show you guys how I got here. So you're going to go to your products, whether it's AHD or IP, your recorders, whether DVR or NVR, and then the number of channels. Once you get into where the number of channels are, you're going to find your device. Now make sure, again, you're paying attention to everything, whether it's a 1U, mini metal, 5 megapixel, 2 megapixel, but identify which one yours is, click on your device. Sorry about that, guys. I'll try to talk a little bit clearer. Hopefully it's not the internet connection. I am hardwired in. Are we any clearer now? No complaints yet, so I'm going to go ahead and push on. So once you're actually to the devices page on the ProvisionISR website, you're going to scroll down and there's going to be some tabs. There's your features, related products and downloads. But the main one we're looking for is the downloads tab. And underneath the downloads tab, it's going to have your specs, your manual, and some other stuff, but it's also going to have your firmware version. All you need to do is click the download, start the download, and it will download it. So for the longest time, ProvisionISR was encapsulating or encoding, zipping their files in a .rar format. It's just another form of a zip file. It's just a different format for that. Lately, they've actually moved over to .zip files, which makes it a lot friendlier. But a lot of people still need the .rar, and some of the files are still behind a .rar, and not all computers can handle unzipping a .rar file natively. So if you're having an issue opening or looking at any of those, I recommend 7-zip. As you can see, it's 7-zip.org. You can just go to Google and search for 7-zip and click on the link. It'll take you right to the website, and you can download either the 32 or 64-bit. Most everyone should be using a 64-bit PC, so that should be all you need. Once you've downloaded and you've installed that, it'll give you a lot more options than just whatever zip program is available natively on a Windows machine. So for instance, I've gone ahead and I've put all my zip files here on my desktop. So we can go in and take a look at one of them. When I right click on it, the file itself is 7-zip appears, and it gives you a bunch of options. So you can actually just open the archive, see what files are available on the inside, or what I normally do is just right click 7-zip and do extract here, and it downloads all the files to my location. So once you actually have the firmwares downloaded and you have them unzipped, you save them there, you'll have your firmware available for your upgrades. So as I was saying, a couple ways to do one on the web through the IPC manager. So what I've done is here's the DVR that we've identified that needs the update. I'll go in my IP manager, go to batch update on the bottom left here, and I need to figure out if it's a software or a kernel update. You guys are going to be only using software updates on here, not kernel. So I'm going to browse. I'm going to go find my file. So once I found my file, I need to make sure it's the right file for the right recorder. I go ahead and double click on that file. It'll put it in. I'm going to, username's going to already be in there for admin, and you're going to enter your password. And once you've done that, you're going to hit update. It's going to go talk to the DVR, the NVR. It's going to push the firmware to it, and it's going to go ahead and go through the firmware upgrade process. Usually it should take only a couple of minutes for the minor versions. On a major version, it could take up to 10 to 15 minutes to upgrade the firmware. So I'm not going to actually do this because I do want to show you the second way we can do it through the web, just not through the IP manager alone, would be directly logging on to the NVR or the DVR itself. So what I can do through my IP manager is I can just double click on my device name. And it will go to the IP of my device. Wow, it's running a little low. So when I have my device page open, I go ahead and log in as normal. Come on. So my device open, I'm going to go ahead and go to the function panel. Inside my function panel, I'm going to go to the system. Under the system, I can go to the upgrade option. Come on. So once I have the upgrade window open, I can go ahead and hit browse, direct it to the same firmware update file that I found under the IP manager. My apologies, this is running so slow, guys. Once I've found my file, just double click on it. It will upload it. Now you can do this both locally through the IP address. You can also do this you looking through it DS and NAT remotely. And it'll direct to the file on your PC and it will upload to the NRD and let you get that voice file. So once you have it selected, you just go ahead and hit the upgrade tab. And you can see right now this current upgrade is starting upgrade. So it should take about 5 to 10 minutes maximum. It could potentially take a few more depending on your connection. As you can see right here, it's uploading the firmware. It's giving you a count when it hits 100%, and then it will reboot the system. And rather than wait for it to do 100%, we will come back in a few minutes and take a look at that as well. So, and then the third way that I did want to show you guys on how to upgrade a firmware. And then once we get through that, I'll go a little bit more in depth on some of the firmwares of the actual processes, and we'll talk about flashing for some of the truly old devices. But one other way that I want to discuss updating the firmware is actually from the DVR or the NVR itself. So I'm going to try to open my capture card here to give you guys a look at one that I actually have hooked up to a monitor right now. I'm hoping that our bandwidth will allow this. And that chirping you hear in the background is the first device that we did the upgrade on. So I do have the capture card up. What I've done is I put the firmware onto a USB drive, and I'll show you guys how to do that as soon as I get done showing you this process real quick. But all you're going to need to do is once you actually have this up and going, let me step over to the DVR here. So I have it on the screen for a reason. This info button here that I went over on the last couple of webinars is going to show you your firmware version, your 1.3.3.2. So you know whether it needs an upgrade or not by knowing what the most current is. And you can check to see what the one is actually on the recorder. But so once you're inside the recorder and you have the USB drive with your firmware upgrade plugged in, you just go ahead and go to the start, go to your settings, go into system and upgrade. So come on. Again, we're having technical issues here, guys. My apologies. So it skipped ahead a little bit there, but as you can see, we're inside the menu. And inside the menu, you're going to go down to System, and you're going to go over to Upgrade. So when you hit Upgrade, it's going to take you inside of the screen right here, and it's going to show you the contents of what you have on the USB thumb drive. As I said, I already have the firmware upgrade here on here. I'll show you that process in a second. And all you have to do is go down, and if you had multiple devices plugged in, this would be where it would list it. Select your file for your upgrade and hit the upgrade button, and it will begin the upgrade. Now, I'm going to go ahead and disconnect because really that's all there is to it. I just want to show you guys the location there of where exactly it was. Wow, it's going to keep it with us, isn't it? But And it's going to run through the same process, anywhere from 3 to 5, maybe 10 minutes of uploading it, rebooting one, and then it'll come up into the prepared firmware or the new firmware. So as I said, I copied that to a thumb drive, and this is something I did want to talk about briefly. So before you do anything, whether it's pulling footage or upgrading the firmware for an NVR or DVR from a USB thumb drive, you need to make sure that thumb drive has been formatted. So as you can see right here, I have a USB drive actually plugged into my laptop right now. All I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on it. Once I save, if there's anything on there I need to save, I'm going to go over and I'm going to hit the format button. It's going to come up. All you need is a quick format. Just make sure you're using the FAT32 file system, because that's how it's going to be read on the NVR or the DVR, and hit start. And once you hit start, it will just take a second. It will format the actual drive. So once I have my thumb drive formatted, I can go back into it, and you'll see that there will be nothing on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab whatever firmware it is that I want to put on the thumb drive. Now, I did want to show you this because, as I said earlier, they come in either zips or RARs. So I have a couple different firmwares here. For instance, the one I just upgraded was this one. It provided me with this firmware right here. It was a zip file. And all I did is I went and I unzipped the file itself, and I extracted it here, which left me with this FLS file. Just copy that FLS file over to your thumb drive, and you are good to go. That's really all there is to it about that. Now, something I did want to talk about is right now, most everything that we're selling and most everything ProvisionISR is providing us is above 126. Mostly it's going to be 1.3.3 or higher, which is good. The major additions, a lot of the cloud connection, a lot of the analytics, a lot of the other things that they've been introducing, the system all came out with the 126 and higher. But there are still some devices that are out there that are a little bit older, and we still do have some that may sell with a slightly older firmware. So there is one other method to upgrade a DVR or an NVR that is on one of the older firmwares. So if you are running anything that is on a 1.1 or a 1.0, basically anything underneath 126, you have to do something called a flash. So what a flash is rather than actually going in the system, directing it, picking the file, and doing an upload, a flash is totally and completely writing over the firmware that's currently written onto the NVR or DVR. So what you need to do is, again, go to your USB drive and format it. I'm just going to delete this file off because I just formatted this. You're going to go into your firmware, and for instance, I pulled an example of 126 for a 16200A. And it's going to actually unzip a number of files rather than just one singular file. When you look, it's going to be 4 files in particular inside that flash that you're going to need. It's going to be anything that's like this. You obviously don't need your PDF, and you actually obviously don't need the actual RAR file to contain the other files. So all you're going to do is you're going to grab those 4 files, and you're going to copy those over to your flash drive, your USB drive. And this is something I can't demonstrate on a webinar, but I do want to talk about it, is to complete the flash, you're going to go ahead and take your USB drive, you're going to put it in one of the ports, one of the USB ports on the recorder, and then you're going to reboot the recorder, or you're going to reset the power on the recorder. And when the recorder comes back up, it's going to attempt to read the USB drive that's plugged in on the USB ports, and then it's going to go ahead and do the larger firmware upgrade that's going to upgrade it from 1.0 or 1.1 to 126. So again, 126 was really the large update that brought a ton of features. So that's why it has to be done this way. So, and if you actually look inside 126, oh, come on. It actually has a step-by-step instruction on the PDF that's written. Will actually explain to you the entirety of the process. Now, something that will happen when you're doing the flash process to 126 or to 133, it will factory default your recorder. It will remove all of your settings. It will, remove all your cameras. It will not format the hard drive. So if you currently have recorded footage on your hard drive, you will keep all of that, and you don't need to re-index from there. But literally all of your other settings will be gone, to include your network settings, any IP cameras you may have added. So before doing any sort of firmware upgrade, in particular one of the large flashes to 126 or 133, make sure you're getting all of this information down. So the ProvisionISR NVRs and DVRs do actually have a backup function to where you can go into the backup function and save all of your settings. Unfortunately, it does not work across the major firmware upgrades. So you can download a firmware, your backup, your DVR from 1.0.0 and then upgrade to 1.2.6. It will not read those settings and it will not reapply them. So before doing any major changes to any of your equipment, make sure that you're writing down everything you need, whether that's multiple different users, the IP addresses of your cameras, any particular settings you have in there, email addresses for notifications. And things like that. But it shows you right here, extract and copy the files, those 4 flash files I showed you, to the USB, put it in the front USB port. Now, just by the by, oddly enough, this is included with every upgrade to 126 for Osaya. Osaya, obviously the firmware on the NVRs and DVRs. So it's not always going to be the front USB port, though. So I have gotten calls from other technicians that are out there trying to do the flash. They reset it 5 times. It's not getting it. I've copied the files over. Generally, the fix is taking it from the front USB port, putting it on the back, resetting it, and it'll immediately recognize. So only one of the 2 USB drives included, or slots included on the NVRs and DVRs, is actually part of the boot cycle. So it'll only read it on one. So if it's not reading it on the first one you try, go ahead and power it back down, move the USB drive to a different one, bring it back up. So that's for 126, and that's the flash version. Additionally, I wanted to show for 133. So if you are running anything older than 1.0 and you're trying to upgrade it to the most current version, as I said, there's a couple milestones. The first one was 126. The next one was 133. Everything after 133 is just going to be an FLS file. What I showed you earlier, just a quick upload, point the NVR, DVR in its direction, and it'll do a quick update for you. These 2 were major versions that required a flash. Now, the key is you cannot skip 126 to go to 133. So if you're running something older than 126, you have to upgrade to 126, and then you can upgrade from 126 to 133. Once you're at 133, you can continue to upgrade, the other ways that I was showing you, the easier ways I was showing you. So if you go and you download the firmware for 133, it will say right here, it will have a warning that tells you, if you are running with 1v1 or lower, you have to update to 126 before you do anything else. And it will actually have a link in there. The link will actually take you to a Dropbox that we have. And inside that Dropbox, it'll have all the 126 firmware versions for all of our DVR and all of our NVR models. So you can actually go inside, pull your file, download your file, flash over to 126, and then continue with the upgrade to 133. If you ignore this step and you do not do the upgrade to 126, you will absolutely brick your NVR DVR. It will stop working, and it will just boot continuously in a loop, beeping at you every 30 seconds. So do make sure that if you're going from anything older than 126 up to 133, you do hit this 126 step. Now, you may be thinking, okay, how do I tell if my recorder needs this? I have a recorder. So all of the firmwares for the recorders will be available on the website. So some people have commented, though, hey, on my 8 megapixel DVR, I'm only seeing 134. The reason is none of those have been released with any of the older firmwares. 133 is the oldest firmware loaded onto that DVR. So, but on some of the other versions, some of the old devices that have been out there longer, you'll be able to find firmware versions all the way up to 126, 134, or 133, 134. So. And really, that is about it as far as the firmware and the flash upgrade process go on NVRs and DVRs. You guys have any questions for me whatsoever on this process, on the flash process? I know I kind of zipped through some of this stuff pretty quickly. So if you've got some questions, please, by all means, feel free. Let me know if I skipped anything. Should you always update the unit, or is this only with issues? There's a couple of different philosophies on this. I'm personally of the opinion if it's not broke, don't fix it, but that's really not the right answer. A lot of guys don't like doing firmware updates on something that is absolutely working just fine. Part of the problem with that is that as the firmware upgrades keep going, there's also security measures that are implemented. For instance, on some of the very much older firmwares, the pre or 1.0s, anonymous login for RTSP was allowed, which theoretically, if someone can find that what port you're using for RTSP and your IP address, they can be streaming your cameras. That was at 126. They made it so you actually have to go in and enable anonymous RTSP and things of that nature. So really, you should be upgrading your firmware on your NVRs and your DVRs as you're in the field. Anytime you come in contact with a unit, we also highly recommend if you're doing installs and you're putting them on the net, whether it's using the DDNS or whether you're using NAT, keep track of all your devices, keep an installer login if the customer is comfortable with it, and then you can reach out and actually do a lot of these upgrades yourself from home without having to roll a truck and go out into the field. But yeah, the answer is you should absolutely be doing it. Next question, is there a point where the updates are able to be done through cloud updates or via push notifications through the apps? So once you upgrade to the 133 version of the firmware, you will actually come to a section that'll let you do cloud upgrades. You know what? As a matter of fact, let me take a look and see if it will show it on this web. So as of anything loaded with 133, you're going to have an option, and it's going to be enabled to allow upgrade. That is, if you have an NVR to the web, it will appear periodically, or when there's software issue or a security patch necessary, they'll push it from ProvisionISR, and you'll get a notification on your phone app. And the phone app itself will say, hey, you're due for a new firmware upgrade or a new security patch. Do you want to allow? You hit OK, and it will auto apply that patch. Now, I know for a lot of larger installs, if someone's doing something on enterprise level or much larger level, you may want to disable that. You may not want your system necessarily running the most current. You may want it on the most stable and handle the upgrades yourself. I'm trying to see if it's going to show it here. I can't remember if it actually shows the cloud upgrade on the web. It does. So this is going to be available. You see it's auto check for updates enabled. It's going to show you which version you're running and what the release date. And what you can do is from here or from the NVR DVR itself, you can go ahead and hit check for updates, and it will show you if this is the latest version or not. Obviously, this one is the latest version. So once you get up to 133, you don't necessarily have to. Now, I will say 8 megapixel stuff that's running 1332 right now, it's not showing up 134. And we've identified that to ProvisionISR, and they're taking a look at it to figure out why. So you may still have to upgrade to 134. You may still not be able to use the cloud upgrade. So is there ever a time where ProvisionISR has you go backwards on an update? Typically, no. The answer is going to be no. And generally, if you've upgraded something to 133, there's no way to step it back to 126. So for some reason you're not happy with your firmware upgrade, there isn't necessarily a way to go backwards. There was one huge glaring exception with their initial rollout of 133. I want to say it was either 126 or 133. There was a bug in the firmware that was causing about 1 in every 50 devices to brick when doing the firmware update legitimately. So ProvisionISR did issue a warning on that, did give us the firmware rollback so we could roll back to a previous version. But typically, no, ProvisionISR is not going to ever have you go backwards on an update unless there is an actual issue that they've identified and put a warning out on. What happens if you try to load firmware for the wrong unit? That's a great question. So ProvisionISR is really dummy proof on this, where if you try to load the wrong firmware, it will, at least to my experience this far, will not let you do it. This is the wrong one. So if you try to go in and identify for the wrong firmware, it will generally either not recognize it if it's a USB drive plugged in, or if it does, it will immediately kick back an error message telling you that you are using the wrong firmware. Hold on one second. So for instance, those are flash files. Let me copy the firmware over to my thumb drive. Go browse for the FLS file. It is going to kick back an error message at some point when it tries to upgrade, and it's going to say that it's not. Now, if you do this directly on the NVR with the USB drive plugged in, it will immediately just kick back a notice saying no. It appears that it's not going to kick me back a notice. It's just not going to let it happen. I'm sitting here staring at it on the my desk, and I'm looking at it right here, and it's just not going to let it happen. It knows that it's the incorrect firmware. So put it in, there'll be an identifier into the firmware itself letting you know, or letting the NVR DVR know this is the correct firmware, or this is something we do need for our upgrade. So no, it will not let you upload the wrong firmware. Now, on cameras you can, but on NVRs and DVRs, it's pretty well dummy proof and it won't let you. How frequently are firmware updates released? Well, to be honest, they've actually slowed down a little bit on firmware upgrades. The next big one that we have coming out is going to be 1.3.4, which is available for DVRs because there wasn't a whole lot of updates between 1.3.3 and 1.3.4. On the NVRs, we do not yet have 1.3.4. We're still running 1.3.3 on those. The firmware updates have definitely slowed down from a couple of years ago when they first released it. We were getting, major firmware version changes. It seemed like on almost a monthly basis. Now we're seeing firmware upgrades maybe every 2, 3, 4 months. Do the firmware upgrades come with change logs? Yes, they do, actually. If you go ahead and you go inside the firmware upgrade itself, oh, this one doesn't. My apologies. The newest one, 1.3.4, apparently doesn't have the change log. The rest of them do have. But again, these were the major changes. 1.3.3 to 1.3.4 had very few changes in it. So this one will show you right here, the change log and everything that's on it. I will contact ProvisionISR about that. That's interesting that the newest 1.3.4 does not have a change log in it. But typically in the past, all the major firmware versions or even the smaller ones have had a change log that shows what's being updated and what's being changed. So anyone else have any other questions for us to get into? All righty then. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close the session. We'll have this uploaded on YouTube this afternoon on the Southwest Automated YouTube channel. Thank you, sir. If you guys have any other questions, in the lobby earlier was my contact info, but if you need, reach out to any of your branches, reach out to me, reach out to Jeremy. Our contact info is all out there. And again, when you do go to the YouTube channel, it should have my contact info on the lobby screen previous to it starting. So you all have a good day, and thank you very much.